You wake up, but you shouldn't be waking up at all. That's the first thought that cuts through the darkness, a single, impossible realization that tears through the fog of unconsciousness like a bolt through flesh. You shouldn't be thinking. You shouldn't be feeling the crushing weight on your chest, the taste of ash coating your tongue like a funeral shroud, the copper-sharp tang of blood in your mouth. You shouldn't be anything anymore, but you are. Your ears ring with a frequency that feels like it's drilling into your skull, that high-pitched whine that comes after an explosion, after something so catastrophically loud that your eardrums simply gave up trying to process it. Beneath that piercing tone, there's something worse: silence. Not the comfortable quiet of sleep, but the absolute absence of sound that comes when every source of noise has been erased. You try to move. Your body doesn't respond immediately. Shock, trauma, the survival instinct forcing you to stay still while your nervous system reboots like a damaged cogitator. When movement finally comes, it's accompanied by pain. Sharp, insistent pain that maps every injury across your body in excruciating detail. Your left arm is pinned beneath something, rubble, rockcrete, twisted metal, you can't tell yet. Your ribs scream with each shallow breath. There's wetness on your face that could be blood, could be tears, could be something worse. The air tastes wrong. It's thick, particulate, like breathing in ground glass mixed with burned chemicals and cremated organics. Each inhalation feels like you're drawing coarse sandpaper across the delicate tissues of your lungs. You cough, and the cough turns into a racking spasm that sends fresh waves of agony through your broken ribs. When you spit, it's dark blood mixed with black soot. Slowly, agonizingly, memory returns. You remember the sirens. Those weren't ordinary attack warnings. Those were the deep, resonant tones reserved for something beyond comprehension. Planetary evacuation protocols that everyone knew were theater. Because where do you evacuate to when the planet itself is condemned? You remember the panic in the streets of the Hive City, billions of souls trying to flee to nowhere, crushing each other in their desperation. You remember looking up. The sky was wrong. It started as pinpricks of light, like new stars being born in the daytime. Except stars don't fall, and these did, graceful arcs of fire descending through the atmosphere with the inevitability of judgment. You remember someone near you screaming that single word, the word that turns even the most faithful servant of the Emperor into a terrified animal: Exterminatus. The atmospheric processors were hit first. You remember the horizon erupting into mushroom clouds that rose like the fists of angry gods, slamming into the stratosphere. The shockwave came seconds later, a wall of pressure that turned windows into shrapnel and buildings into tombs. You remember being thrown, tumbling through air thick with debris and dismembered bodies. You remember the vault door. You'd been near the old Underhive entrance, a reinforced bunker from the dark age of technology, and you remember crawling toward it as the world came apart around you. Then you remember the heat. The terrible, absolute heat as the oxygen in the air ignited, as chemical fire spread faster than thought, as the very atmosphere decided to immolate itself. You remember the vault door slamming shut, automatic protocols, blessed machinery responding when humanity couldn't. You remember the sound of impacts above, thousands of tons of collapsing hive structure burying the vault under a mountain of its own corpse. Then you remember darkness. But that was, how long ago? Hours, days, time loses meaning when you're buried alive under a dead world. With tremendous effort, you free your trapped arm. The limb is numb, useless, crushed, or just deprived of blood flow, you can't tell yet. You blink, trying to clear the dust from your eyes. Total darkness presses against your face like a physical thing. No light. None. Not even the ambient glow of lumen strips or the bioluminescent lichen that grew in the underhive. Nothing. You fumble in the darkness, hands searching for anything familiar. Your fingers brush across something cold and metallic, a fallen support beam. You follow its length until you find the edge, then use it as leverage to pull yourself upward. Every muscle protests. Your body is trying to convince you to stay down, to stop moving, to accept the peace of stillness. But something deeper, that ancient, animal part of your brain that's kept humanity alive since before the age of strife, refuses to surrender. Standing, finally, you reach into your coat pocket. By the Emperor's grace, it's still there, a small hand-lumen standard issue for underhive workers. Your thumb finds the activation stud. For a moment, you hesitate. Part of you doesn't want to see. Part of you knows that once you illuminate this darkness, once you see what's become of your world, you can never unknow it. You press the stud. The beam cuts through the dust-choked air, and you wish you hadn't looked. The vault is partially collapsed. Where there should be reinforced walls and emergency supplies, there's a chaos of twisted metal and shattered rockcrete. Bodies, or what remains of them, lie scattered in frozen tableaus of final terror. You recognize some faces. Marcus from recycling, Yadima who worked the water pumps, the Arbite's enforcer who used to patrol this sector. They died instantly when the vault ceiling partially gave way, crushed under tons of debris. You survived because you were deeper in, near the old blast door that separated the vault's sections. You're alone with the dead. The beam of your lumen finds the exit, a narrow gap where the blast door has been torn from its frame by unimaginable force. Beyond it there's light, faint, red-tinged, but light nonetheless. With nowhere else to go, you climb toward it, pulling yourself over debris past bodies through gaps barely wide enough for your shoulders. It takes an hour, maybe two. Your sense of time is shattered. When you finally emerge, when you pull yourself through the final gap and onto the surface of your world, you stop breathing for several seconds, not from exertion, but from the sheer impossibility of what you're seeing. This isn't your world anymore. The landscape has been transformed into a vision of geological hell. Where there should be the towering spires of Hive Primus, there's nothing but a crater, a wound in the planet's surface so vast that you can't see its far edge, even from this elevated position. The crater is filled with what looks like black glass, solidified magma from when the Earth itself melted and resolidified. The air shimmers with heat distortion, even though the fires must have burned out days ago. The sky is the color of old blood. The atmospheric processors are gone, replaced by chemical storms that roil and churn across a horizon that seems simultaneously too close and impossibly distant. Ash falls like black snow, coating everything in a funeral shroud. The silence is absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling through structures because there are no structures left to rustle. You turn in a slow circle, and with each degree of rotation the horror compounds. Hive Secundus, melted. The industrial sectors, vaporized. The agricultural domes, shattered, their contents burned to sterile ash. The entire planetary infrastructure, built up over thousands of years, housing billions of souls, has been erased with the thoroughness of divine wrath. The math is simple and terrible. Your world had a population of 14 billion. You can see perhaps a dozen figures moving in the distant ruins. 14 billion to a dozen. Those are extinction-level numbers. Emperor, preserve us, you whisper, and your voice sounds obscene in this silence, a human sound in a place where humanity has been systematically removed. You're not alone, you realize. There, picking through the rubble about half a kilometer distant, you can see movement. Another survivor, or perhaps several. The sight should bring relief, the primitive comfort of knowing you're not the last living thing on a dead world. Instead, it brings a question that will haunt you in the days to come. What does it mean that you survived? But before you can contemplate that question, before you can even begin to process the magnitude of what's happened, you notice something else, something that transforms your impossible survival from miracle to nightmare. Hanging in the upper atmosphere, barely visible through the ash storms, you can see them. Shapes. Massive, artificial, wrong. It takes your traumatized mind several seconds to recognize what you're looking at. They're defense satellites, but not Imperial Navy. These bear the seal of the Inquisition, the stylized eye that every citizen learns to fear. They're quarantine platforms, and they're still active. Their weapon batteries aimed downward at a world they've already killed. You see the warning buoys then, orbital beacons transmitting their message in an endless automated loop. Your microbeat is broken, crushed during your burial, but you don't need to hear the broadcast to know what it says. You've heard these warnings before, in grainy pick captures from other condemned worlds, in cautionary tales told to enforce compliance. By order of the Holy Inquisition, this world has been declared perdita. Approach is forbidden. Landing is forbidden. Survival is not possible. In the Emperor's name, this world is dead. Let it remain so. The realization settles over you like one of the corpse shrouds that cover your dead hive mates. They're not coming back. The ships that delivered this judgment have already departed for other crusades, other battles, other worlds that still matter. Your world, your people, your history, your very existence has been struck from Imperial records with the finality of an execution. This world is a tomb. The Imperium has sealed it, marked it with warnings that will endure for millennia, and moved on with the cold efficiency that lets them maintain an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds. And you're still breathing. That's when the true horror begins to crystallize in your mind. This isn't survival. Survival implies hope, rescue, return to normalcy. This is something else entirely, something without a name in any language you know. You've become a ghost, legally and practically dead, trapped in a body that hasn't received the message yet. You survived Exterminatus. The Imperium doesn't plan for that. They don't consider it possible. Their weapons are designed to eliminate all life, to sterilize worlds down to the bedrock, to leave nothing but dead stone spinning in the void. So what does it mean that you're standing here? The question echoes in your mind as you look down at your hands, still flesh, still human, still trembling with shock and pain. You survived. But as you stare at the devastated horizon, at the satellites that promise death to anyone who approaches or tries to leave, at the absolute totality of destruction surrounding you, one thought rises above all others. They're not coming back. They'll never come back. This world is a tomb and you're still breathing. To understand your situation, to truly grasp the depths of the trap you're in, you need to understand what Exterminatus means to the Imperium of man. It's not war. War implies opposition, struggle, the possibility of victory or defeat. Exterminatus is cosmic hygiene. It's the Imperium's acknowledgement that some infections run so deep, some corruption spreads so insidiously, that the only cure is total eradication. It's not a tactical decision, it's a theological one. The Imperium doesn't conduct Exterminatus lightly. Each world represents millennia of investment, infrastructure, population, tithes, production. To destroy a world is to amputate a limb from the Emperor's realm. But the Imperium learned a lesson during the Horus Heresy that it's never forgotten. Mercy is a luxury that humanity cannot afford. Better to destroy a world and everyone on it than to risk the corruption spreading. Better 14 billion deaths than 14 billion souls serving chaos, the Tyranids, or any of the countless other threats that hunger for human extinction. The methods of Exterminatus are many, and each is thorough in its own terrible way. Cyclonic torpedoes, the most common method, are two-stage weapons of apocalyptic power. The first stage burrows deep into a planet's crust, sometimes kilometers down, before detonating with the force of multiple nuclear weapons. The second stage ignites atmospheric reactions that spread the destruction globally. Earthquakes cascade across continents. Volcanoes erupt in chains. The very tectonic plates shift and shatter. Within hours, a habitable world becomes a seismically unstable hell that will remain uninhabitable for centuries, if not millennia. Atmospheric incinerators are simpler but no less absolute. They ignite the planet's atmosphere itself, turning the air into a global firestorm that burns at temperatures that melt stone and vaporize flesh in microseconds. Everything above ground simply ceases. The world's surface becomes a sterile glass desert, scoured clean of any organic material. No evidence of civilization remains, just geological anomalies where cities used to stand. Then there are the virus bombs, life-eater viruses and their variants. These are the ones that haunt Imperial nightmares. The virus doesn't just kill, it transforms organic matter on a cellular level, breaking down biomass and releasing flammable gases. When enough of the gas accumulates, the planet's atmosphere ignites in a secondary firestorm. It's a weapon so horrifying that its use requires inquisitorial authorization and Astartes witnesses. The virus is indiscriminate and all-consuming. It kills everything: humans, animals, plants, bacteria, even some extremophile organisms. It leaves worlds covered in decaying organic sludge that eventually becomes toxic ash. There are other methods: Modali's atmospheric missiles that tear away planetary atmospheres entirely, leaving airless rocks; psychic annihilation that burns out the Imperium's connection to a world; orbital bombardment so sustained that continents are literally vaporized; certain Mechanicus weapons whose function is so classified that even their names are redacted from Imperial records. The common element: thoroughness. These weapons are designed to leave nothing. Your world received cyclonic torpedoes. You can recognize the signatures. The tectonic instability that created those massive chasms. The way entire hive cities collapsed into the planet's crust, swallowed by their own foundation. The seismic aftershocks that you still feel occasionally, days later, like the planet's death spasm hasn't quite finished. But knowledge of the weapons is only the beginning of understanding your situation. The real nightmare lies in what happens after the Exterminatus is declared. The inquisitorial quarantine protocols are absolute. Within hours of an Exterminatus order being executed, inquisitorial vessels deploy orbital monitoring stations, automated platforms equipped with auger arrays, weapon batteries, and logic engines programmed with a single directive. Nothing leaves, nothing enters. These aren't manned stations. They're machine spirits bound to a single purpose, incapable of mercy or discretion. The platform's augers sweep the planet's surface constantly, detecting any electromagnetic emissions, any heat signatures above baseline, any movement that might indicate survivors trying to signal for help. Their weapon batteries, ranging from lance strikes to torpedo tubes, stand ready to eliminate any ship that ignores the quarantine warnings. The quarantine buoys broadcast continuously in every known Imperial language and several Xenos dialects, warning away any vessel that might stumble into the system. The message is simple: this world is dead, approach means death, the Inquisition has spoken. Rogue traders, merchants, naval patrols, all receive the same warning, backed by the full authority of the throne. The bureaucratic machinery follows. Administratum scribes on distant worlds receive sealed orders. The condemned planet is struck from tithe record, removed from star charts, its coordinates marked with warning sigils. Over time, years, decades, the world fades from institutional memory. It becomes one of the nameless dead worlds, a cautionary tale, a set of coordinates to avoid. But why? Why such thoroughness? Why not check for survivors, evacuate the innocent, show mercy to those who somehow endured? The answer is the reason your world was condemned in the first place. Exterminatus is only authorized in specific circumstances: chaos infestation, tyrannid infestation, genostellar cult domination, orc infestation beyond purging, Necron awakening. These aren't political problems or military setbacks. These are extinction-level threats to the human species itself. Your world received Exterminatus because an Inquisitor determined that it was contaminated beyond redemption. The official records, if anyone bothered to keep them, would list the specific reason: chaos taint detected in the planetary government, genostellar cult infiltration reaching critical mass, a demonic incursion that couldn't be contained. The specific doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the logical conclusion that follows. If the world was condemned for contamination, then anything that survives the Exterminatus is, by definition, contaminated. Do you understand the trap? You survived an event designed to kill everything on a contaminated world. Therefore, you must be contaminated. There is no other explanation that Imperial doctrine accepts. Either you were extraordinarily lucky, so statistically improbable that it borders on the impossible, or you were able to survive because the very taint they were trying to eliminate protected you, changed you, made you wrong. Either way, you're a problem that shouldn't exist. The scale of your isolation is difficult for a human mind to comprehend. In our world, being stranded on a deserted island seems like the ultimate isolation. But an island is still on Earth, still theoretically reachable, still part of the same planetary system with potential rescue just a radio call away. You're not on an island, you're on a planet. And that planet is in a solar system that occupies a specific point in the galaxy. A galaxy so vast that light itself takes 100,000 years to cross it. The nearest inhabited Imperial world is likely several light years away, a distance so profound that even traveling at faster-than-light speeds through the warp, the journey takes weeks or months. And even if someone wanted to reach you, even if some merchant captain or military commander felt compassion and decided to ignore the quarantine, they couldn't. The warp routes that led to your world are marked as forbidden. The quarantine platforms would fire on approaching ships. The Inquisition maintains lists of vessels that violate quarantine orders, and those lists are enforcement priorities. To rescue you would be heresy, not just legally but theologically. It would be defying the Emperor's judgment as executed by his Inquisition. You are more alone than any human being has ever been. You are more isolated than the first colonists who left Terra during the dark age of technology because at least they chose their isolation and had hope of building something new. You have no choice and no hope. You're simply forgotten, erased, unmade by Imperial decree. Let me tell you a story, a documented case that gives context to your situation. The world of Herakan IV was a moderately prosperous hive world in the Orpheus sector, notable only for its efficient mining operations and stable governance. In 847, M41, Inquisitor Chevak of the Ordo Xenos detected signs of Genestealer infiltration. An investigation revealed the horrifying truth. The cult had reached fourth-generation hybrids and had infiltrated the planetary government, the Arbites, even the local guard regiments. The contamination was total. Chevak requested Exterminatus. It was granted. The Grey Knight's battle barge Unyielding Valor delivered the judgment. Cyclonic torpedoes, full planetary bombardment. Herakan's 3 hive cities, housing 12 billion souls, were consumed in tectonic catastrophe. The strikes were so powerful that they destabilized the planet's core, causing chain reaction earthquakes that lasted for weeks. The world's crust fractured, swallowing entire cities into magma chambers that had been stable for millennia. The Imperium considered the matter closed. The coordinates were marked as Perdita. Ships were rerouted. Herakan IV became Herakan Perdita, a dead world, mourned briefly and then forgot. 73 years later, a rogue trader named Vasquez, chasing rumors of archaeotech in the sector, made a navigational error. His vessel, the Prophet's Promise, emerged from the warp dangerously close to Herakan Perdita. The quarantine platforms had degraded over 7 decades, some destroyed by debris, others succumbing to mechanical failure. Vasquez's augurs detected something impossible: habitation signatures, structure, organization. Against every regulation and common sense, Vasquez landed. What he found was documented in his personal journal, later seized by the Inquisition during his trial. I'll read you an excerpt. The miners survived. By the Emperor's grace or his curse, the deep shaft mining teams were below the bombardment's direct effects, sealed in their tunnel systems, protected by kilometers of rock they endured. When they emerged months later, they found a world transformed into hell. They should have died. The atmosphere was toxic, the water contaminated, the radiation levels fatal. But they adapted. They built filtration systems from salvaged equipment. They found water in the deepest aquifers. They lived in the mining tunnels like insects in the corpse of a giant. By the time we found them, they'd been alone for 73 years. An entire generation born and died knowing nothing but the tunnels and the poisoned surface. They developed their own dialect, their own customs, their own changes. When my crew came down, they thought we were angels. They thought the Emperor had finally remembered them. They wept, grown men and women, crying like children, thanking us for their salvation. We couldn't tell them the truth. We couldn't tell them that finding them alive was a curse, not a blessing. That survival proved contamination, that we'd have to report them. On our third day, I examined one of the children, a girl, maybe 8 years old, offering me a flower she'd grown in the tunnel hydroponics. Her eyes were wrong, subtly wrong, the pupils too wide with a faint purple tint. Genestealer genetic markers, my Medikey confirmed later. Recessive, dormant but present. They were all carriers, the children especially. The taint hadn't died with the world, it had survived, hidden in genetic code, waiting. We left supplies, told them a rescue fleet was coming. Then we departed and sent a priority message to the Inquisition. The Ordos dispatched a strike team. According to the official report, they conducted verification protocols. The reality, as reported by the team's confessor, was simpler. They burned everyone, every man, woman, and child. Then they collapsed the tunnel system with demolition charges, sealing the ashes beneath a mountain of rock. The last entry in my journal before it was confiscated read, Day 247, we saw a ship today. We lit every fire we had. It didn't stop. It didn't even scan. We are ghosts to them. That was from one of the survivors' recovered journals. They saw other ships over the years, probably Navy patrols or merchants skirting the quarantine border. Each time they signaled. Each time they were ignored. Each time their hope died a little more, until we came, until hope was reborn. And then we killed it more thoroughly than the original Exterminatus ever could. Vasquez was tried for quarantine violation and executed. His crew was mind-wiped and inducted into servitor duties. The Prophet's promise was scuttled. Herrick and Perdita received a second, more thorough Exterminatus, atmospheric incineration this time, to ensure that anything surviving in the deep tunnels was finally eliminated. That is the precedent for your situation. That is what happens when the Imperium discovers survivors on a dead world. Not rescue, not mercy. Thorough elimination. Because in the calculus of Imperial survival, individual human lives are irrelevant. Only the species matters. Only humanity's continuation justifies the cost. And if eliminating a few hundred survivors prevents even the possibility of contamination spreading, then those survivors were already dead the moment the Exterminatus was declared. You're not alone in your situation. Across the galaxy, across the 10,000 years of the Imperium's existence, this has happened before. Will happen again. There are probably survivors right now on other condemned worlds going through the same realization you're experiencing. Some will die quickly, radiation, toxins, starvation. Others will persist for years, even decades, clinging to hope that reason says is impossible. All will die eventually. Either the world will kill them or the Imperium will. You see now, don't you, the scope of your tragedy? You're not just stranded. You're not just facing survival in a hostile environment. You're facing the absolute certainty that even if you overcome every obstacle, even if you somehow persist and signal and make contact, the best case scenario is execution. Quick if you're fortunate, slow if you're not. You're legally dead, administratively erased, and theologically condemned. And you're still breathing. Rule 1, never drink first. That's what she tells you when you meet her on day 5. The woman who used to be Sergeant Marna Kellos of the Xandrian 42nd Guard Regiment, though she doesn't use rank anymore because what's the point when there's no army and no command structure and no Imperium that remembers your service? She just goes by Sergeant now, and the dozen other survivors you've encountered in the ruins of what used to be Hive Tertius have already learned to listen when she speaks. You're standing at the edge of a crater that used to be a water reclamation facility, looking at the stagnant pool at the bottom. Your throat is so dry that swallowing feels like dragging broken glass down your esophagus. You've been 3 days without water, 3 days of searching through ruins, finding nothing but ash and chemical residue and cisterns that somehow managed to be both empty and contaminated simultaneously. This pool is water. It's brown-green and covered in a film of something you don't want to identify, but it's liquid, and your body is screaming for it. Never drink first, she repeats, watching you from behind her salvaged rebreather. The device is guard issue, rated for toxic environments, but it's running on its last filter cartridge. Maybe she's got another week before it's just a face decoration. You test it, you wait, you watch someone else drink it if you can. You never drink first. I'll die without water, you croak. You'll die faster with wrong water, she responds. There's no sympathy in her voice, not because she's cruel, but because sympathy is a luxury neither of you can afford. She unslings a crude testing kit salvaged from the ruins, probably from a Medici facility or industrial site. Test strips for common contaminants, a radiation counter that clicks ominously, a small vial of reagent that changes color in the presence of certain toxins. She tests the water, 3 different strips, all turn colors that make her grimace behind the rebreather. Radiation, high but not immediately lethal. Chemical contamination, multiple heavy metals and industrial solvents. Biological contamination, uncertain but probably yes. She looks at you with eyes that have seen too much and not enough. You drink this, you'll last maybe 2 weeks before the kidney failure kills you. Maybe 3 if you're lucky. So we move on. So we filter it, improvise, adapt, survive. She pulls out what looks like a sleeve from a guard-issue flak vest, stuffed with activated charcoal scavenged from air filtration systems, layered with cloth, sealed at one end. It's not perfect. Won't get the radiation, won't get everything chemical, but it'll get enough that you might live long enough to find something better. You spend the next 4 hours creating a filtration system from debris and desperation. The sergeant works with the efficiency of someone who's done field expedient engineering under fire, which you learn she has. 37 years in the Guard, everything from urban warfare to void combat. Survived 3 different campaigns that most of her regiment didn't. Survived Exterminatus because she'd been inspecting the Underhive armory when the bombardment hit, and the armory was designed to withstand direct artillery strikes. She survived because she was competent, trained, and extraordinarily lucky. Now that competence is dedicated to surviving a different kind of war, one where the enemy is the air itself, the water, the ground beneath your feet. The filtered water tastes like metal and ash and regret. But it's wet and you drink it and you don't die immediately. You'll count that as a victory. The atmosphere is trying to kill you. Slowly, insidiously, with every breath. The bombardment didn't just destroy the surface infrastructure. It fundamentally changed the planet's atmospheric composition. The chemical fires released compounds that don't exist in nature. Exotic pollutants from vaporized industrial sectors, aerosols from burned hive cities, particulates from destroyed promethium refineries. The air is a toxic soup that humans were never meant to breathe. Your lungs are adapting, but adaptation isn't painless. You wake up every morning coughing blood dark, almost black blood mixed with gray mucus that tastes like metal. Your throat is permanently raw, as if you've been screaming for hours. Your sinuses burn with every inhalation. You can feel the tissue of your lungs being damaged and your body trying desperately to repair it, but repair requires resources, water, nutrients, rest, that you don't have. The sergeant's rebreather is a reminder of what you don't have. The handful of survivors who possessed protective equipment are marked by their relative health. Those of you breathing the naked air are marked by different signs. The wet cough that never stops, the blood-stained lips, the grayish tint to skin as your body struggles to oxygenate itself through damaged lungs. On day 12, you find a partially collapsed administratum building. Inside, sealed in a vault meant to protect documents from fire and flood, you discover a cache of emergency supplies, rebreather units designed for scribes to use during toxic ink spill protocols. There are 7 units. There are 18 survivors in your group by then. The sergeant makes the decision. The most physically compromised get the rebreathers, those who are coughing blood most severely, whose lips have turned blue, who can't walk more than a few dozen meters without collapsing. You're not among them. You're younger, stronger, your lungs still functional enough. You watch a middle-aged man, a former Manufactorum foreman named Grievous, receive one of the rebreathers. His relief is immediate and obvious. The next morning, he's breathing easier, moving faster, already looking healthier. The next morning after that, he's dead. Murdered in his sleep, his rebreather stolen by someone who needed it more, or at least wanted it more. The sergeant finds the killer, a younger survivor, a woman who'd been coughing up blood for days. She's wearing Grievous's rebreather when the sergeant confronts her. "Take it off," the sergeant orders. "I need it," the woman responds, her voice steady despite the guard-issue lasgun pointed at her chest. "He needed it too. He got to use it for a day. He died healthy. I'm dying slowly. Why should I have to choke to death when there's this?" The sergeant doesn't lower the weapon, but she doesn't fire either. Instead, she asks a question that echoes through your group. Do we execute her? You're standing in a circle, all 18 survivors minus Grievous, looking at each other, trying to remember what justice means, what punishment means, what civilization means when the civilization that defined those concepts has erased you from existence. The debate lasts an hour. Arguments for execution. She's a murderer, resources are scarce, we can't tolerate violence within the group. Arguments against. We're all dying anyway, she was desperate, executing her wastes a potential worker, where do we draw the line? In the end, the sergeant makes a command decision. The woman keeps the rebreather, because taking it away is just executing her slowly. But she's exiled from the group. Given a pack with 3 days of supplies and sent away from the settlement. You never see her again. You don't know if she survived, found another group, or died alone in the ruins. What you do know is that the precedent has been set. Survival trumps morality. Necessity justifies almost anything. The Imperium killed billions to prevent corruption, but in the survivors, it's creating exactly the kind of moral degradation it feared. By day 30, you've learned to navigate by corpses. The bodies are everywhere. Ash drifts that used to be people. Skeletal remains scattered through ruins. Mummified corpses in sealed chambers who died from asphyxiation when the air became unbreathable. Each represents a small tragedy, a life ended, a story unfinished. Each also represents potential resources. The sergeant teaches you how to approach a body. Check for booby traps. Some survivors have learned to protect their dead from scavengers. Check for contamination. Some bodies are radioactive enough to kill you with prolonged exposure. Check for useful items, clothing, equipment, food, water, anything that survived the bombardment. Strip the useful, leave the rest. Don't think about who they were. Can't afford to. You find a family in a partially collapsed hab block on day 37. There in what used to be their living space, mother, father, 3 children. They died together, huddled in a corner, probably from carbon monoxide poisoning when the ventilation systems failed. The parents are embracing the children. Children are holding toys, small figures of Imperial soldiers, a worn doll, a data slate with children's stories. They have water bottles, still sealed, still pure somehow. You need those bottles. Your hands shake as you reach for them. You have to move the mother's arm. She's clutching one of the bottles, even in death. Her skin is paper dry, preserved by the sealed environment. She feels like parchment under your fingers. The first bottle comes free easily. The second requires you to shift the father's body. The third, the smallest, is held by the youngest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old when she died. You take the bottle from her dead fingers. You tell yourself it's survival. You tell yourself she doesn't need it anymore. You tell yourself that sentiment is a luxury and that every human culture has had to confront the dead with pragmatism. You tell yourself a lot of things. What you don't tell yourself is how much you hate what you're becoming. How each compromise, each moral boundary crossed, each moment of choosing survival over dignity feels like dying by degrees, slower than the Exterminatus, but just as thorough. That night, you drink the water. It's the purest thing you've tasted since the bombardment, clean, cool, untainted. It tastes like life. It tastes like shame. On day 43, you encounter another survivor group. It's not a friendly meeting. There are maybe 20 of them, operating out of a sealed section of the old transit tunnels. Your group has grown to 25, more survivors finding each other, drawn to the relative organization the sergeant provides. You've heard rumors of other groups, some cooperative, some hostile, some that have descended into complete savagery. This group seems organized, well supplied. Their leader is a former gang enforcer, a huge man covered in prison tattoos and burned scars from the bombardment. He's not interested in cooperation. "This is our sector," he states, his group arrayed behind him with improvised weapons. "The filtration plant, the water reclamation, the eastern ruins, all ours. You scavenge here, you're stealing from us." The sergeant doesn't back down. "There's no ours anymore. The Imperium's gone. This is survival, not territory disputes." But everything's a territory dispute when resources matter. And right now, everything matters. Standoff lasts hours. Both groups armed, mostly improvised weapons, but your group has 3 lasguns from the old armory and their group has numbers. A fight would kill people on both sides, would waste ammunition, would create wounded who'd drain medical supplies neither group can spare. Eventually, a negotiation. The eastern ruins are theirs, but they'll trade. Food for filters, medicine for weapons, information for supplies. It's not friendship, it's détente, maintained by mutually assured destruction. But the tension remains. You see it in how both groups keep sentries posted, how weapons are never far from hand, how every interaction is weighed for advantage and threat. The sergeant starts posting guards at night, something you hadn't needed before because who was there to guard against? Now you're guarding against other survivors, against other humans, against the very people who should be your allies in this hell. On day 59, someone from your group is found dead near the border between territories, killed with a knife, supplies stolen. Could be the gang's territory claim being enforced. Could be a rogue from either group. Could be an accident that looked like murder. Doesn't matter. The trust that was already paper-thin tears completely. You find yourself standing watch at night, a las pistol in your hand, scavenged from a dead Arbite's, low charge, maybe 30 shots left before it's an expensive club, and you're watching the darkness not for environmental threats but for human ones. The Exterminatus killed billions to prevent corruption and violence. In the survivors, it's breeding exactly that. You're becoming the thing the Imperium feared, and you can't stop it because survival demands it. The sergeant stands beside you during one watch, looking out at the ruins. "I served 37 years, she says quietly. Fought Xenos and heretics and traitors, believed in the Imperium, believed in order and duty and sacrifice." She's quiet for a moment. Then, "We're proving them right, we're becoming what they thought we were. The Exterminatus should have killed us. By surviving, we're becoming the monsters that justified killing this world." You don't have an answer for that, neither does she. You just stand watch, weapon ready, prepared to kill other survivors if necessary. Because survival isn't heroic, survival is desperate, and desperation breeds monsters. The first time Javan notices something wrong, it's just a headache. Everyone has headaches, the toxic air, the stress, the malnutrition, the dehydration. Headaches are baseline, a constant companion like hunger or fear. But this one is different. This one feels like pressure, like something trying to push out through his skull from the inside. It comes with sounds, not real sounds, but a kind of auditory hallucination, like hearing voices in static or recognizing words in white noise. He tells himself it's nothing, stress, trauma. He watched his entire hab block vaporize in the bombardment, watched people he'd known his entire life turn to ash in seconds. Of course his mind is broken. Of course he's hearing things. It would be strange if he weren't. But the headaches get worse, and the sounds get clearer. By month 3, by day 90-something, he's lost exact count because tracking dates seems absurd when every day is identical survival. The sounds have resolved into something uncomfortably close to words. Not high Gothic, not low Gothic, not any language he recognizes. But somehow he understands them, or thinks he does. It's like knowing what someone means without hearing the actual words, and they're offering advice. Don't drink from that cistern. He doesn't know why the thought occurs to him, but it does, clear and certain as a voice. He's standing at the edge of a water source, ready to fill his containers when the thought stops him cold. The sergeant hasn't tested this one yet. The water looks clear. He steps back, asks the sergeant to test it. She tests it. Finds contamination that would have killed him in days, exotic chemicals that the standard test strips barely detect, some kind of industrial solvent mixed with biological waste. Good instincts, she tells him. Instincts. Right, that's what it is. Instincts. Except instincts don't whisper, don't form words. Don't sound almost like they're coming from outside your head instead of inside it. The mutations start small. So small you might miss them if you weren't looking. But in a community of survivors living in close quarters, sharing limited supplies, examining each other constantly for signs of contamination or illness, nothing stays hidden for long. It starts with a woman named Petra, former manufactorum worker, mid-40s, tough as rockcrete. She's one of the core group, a survivor the sergeant trusts. One morning, you notice her scratching at her arm constantly, like it itches beyond tolerance. When she finally rolls up her sleeve, you see why. The skin isn't right. It's too smooth, almost translucent, like looking through thin parchment. You can see the muscles underneath, the blood vessels, the network of biological machinery that usually stays hidden beneath opaque flesh. She stares at it with an expression somewhere between horror and fascination. "It doesn't hurt," she says. "It just changed, overnight. I went asleep normal and woke up like this." The sergeant examines it. So does the former Medici orderly your group picked up last week, a young man named Varos who's trying to provide medical care with no supplies and deteriorating knowledge. They both come to the same conclusion: mutation, genetic restructuring. Her cells are changing on a fundamental level. "The virus," Varos says quietly. "If they used life-eater virus variants in the bombardment, and they usually do, mixed with cyclonic torpedoes for thoroughness, then there could be residual contamination. The virus doesn't just kill, it breaks down and restructures organic material. Most people die instantly, but with partial exposure, with the right genetic factors, with extraordinary luck." He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The implication is clear. The virus is still active, still working on survivors, just slowly instead of all at once. Petra looks at her translucent arm. "What do I do?" Nobody has an answer. Over the next week, the changes spread. Up her arm, across her shoulder, creeping toward her torso. You can see her heart beating through her chest wall by day 10. See her lungs inflating and deflating. See her digestive system processing the meager rations she consumes. She's becoming anatomically transparent, a living medical diagram. The horror isn't that she's changing. The horror is that she's still her. Still thinking, still functioning, still Petra, just Petra in a body that's becoming something else. "Am I still human?" she asks one night, looking at you with desperate eyes visible behind transparent eyelids. You want to say yes. You want to offer comfort, certainty, the reassurance that humanity is more than flesh. But you remember the Imperium's doctrine. Genetic purity is sacred, mutation is corruption, deviation from baseline human is heresy. In the Imperium's eyes, Petra stopped being human the moment her skin changed. "I think so," you finally answer. "It's the best you can offer." The infection bay is located in the deepest part of your settlement, a section of the old underhive maintenance tunnels that can be sealed from the rest of the complex. The sergeant established it in month 4 when the mutations became impossible to ignore. The rules are simple, absolute, and terrifying. If you start changing, if the mutations become obvious, you go into the infection bay. You don't leave until you die or until the changes stabilize into something that doesn't threaten the group. There are 12 chambers, each a sealed cell that was once a maintenance access point or storage locker. Each has a small window, thick, reinforced transparent aluminum that lets observers see inside. Each has a ventilation grate that can be sealed. Each has, somewhere inside, a weapon. The weapon is a mercy. If the changes become unbearable, if you feel yourself losing consciousness or control, if you simply can't stand being whatever you're becoming, you have an option. A single-shot stub pistol. 1 round. 1 choice. Some chambers are silent. The occupants died from mutation, from despair, from that single round. Their bodies are left inside because removing them would mean exposing someone to whatever killed them. Some chambers have sounds, scratching, crying, pleading. The scratches on the inside of the doors are the worst. Deep gouges in metal made by fingernails or something that used to be fingernails. Desperate, repetitive, mindless scratching. Sound wakes you at night. That metal-on-metal shriek of something trying to escape, over and over, never stopping, never succeeding. One chamber holds a former worker from your group, a man named Tallius who started developing additional appendages. Not arms exactly, something more like tentacles growing from his shoulders and back. They moved independently, grasped things without conscious thought. He went into the bay voluntarily before the changes progressed further. You can see him through the window. The appendages have multiplied. Dozens now, filling the small chamber like a nest of serpents. They're constantly moving, exploring, touching. His face, the part that's still recognizably human, shows an expression of confused horror. He hasn't used the pistol. You don't know if that's courage or if he's lost the capacity to make that choice. Javan's changes are different, less visible, more insidious. His eyes have changed color, a shift so subtle that he didn't notice it himself until someone pointed it out. They used to be gray. Now they're a pale gold, almost amber, with flecks of color that seem to shift in different light. It's beautiful, actually, almost angelic. It's also absolutely wrong. Eye color doesn't just change in adult humans. Genetic restructuring, cellular mutation, something fundamental being rewritten. The sergeant noticed immediately, recognizing the significance that Javan tried to ignore. You should go to the infection bay, she tells him. For eye color, I'm not growing tentacles. My skin hasn't changed. I'm still me. Are you? The question hangs between them. Javan wants to say yes, wants to insist that he's still himself, still human, still loyal to the Emperor despite the Emperor abandoning him. But certainty is becoming harder to maintain because the whispers are louder now, and they're making more sense. They tell him things, where to find supplies, which water sources are safe, when someone in the group is planning violence. Information he shouldn't know, couldn't know through normal means. And every time the information proves correct, every time he follows the Whisper's advice and benefits from it, he trusts them a little more. He knows what this means. He's not stupid. He knows the lore, the warnings, the cautionary tales. Whispers in your head offering helpful information is textbook chaos corruption. Insidious, gradual, seductive. You start by accepting helpful advice and end by accepting damnation. But here's the thing. The Whispers haven't asked for anything yet, haven't demanded worship or violence or corruption. They've just helped, given information, kept him alive. And in a world where the God Emperor of mankind has definitively abandoned him, where staying loyal led only to being erased from existence, why shouldn't he listen to voices that actually seem to care about his survival? The rationalization is seductive. He recognizes it as rationalization, recognizes it as the first step down a path that leads to damnation. But recognition doesn't make the Whispers less helpful, doesn't make survival less important. On day 167, Javan finds a cache of supplies, food, medicine, filters, hidden in a location the Whispers directed him to. More supplies than your group has seen in weeks, enough to keep everyone alive for another month. He brings them back, becomes a hero. The sergeant eyes him suspiciously, but she doesn't refuse the supplies. Can't afford to. That night, alone in his sleeping space, Javan looks at his reflection in a broken mirror. His eyes are definitely gold now. No ambiguity. Golden like the light of burning cities. Golden like the taint of the warp given physical form. I'm still me, he whispers to his reflection. The whispers in his head agree. They sound comforting. They sound like they care. He doesn't notice that his reflection's smile doesn't match his expression. Not yet. Month 5 brings diversity to the mutations. A spectrum of changes spread across the survivor population. The engineer who begins understanding machines instinctively, just by touching them. He knows their function, their flaws, their potential. He repairs equipment that should be beyond salvaging, jury-rigged solutions that violate basic physics. His gift makes him invaluable. It also costs him language. He stops speaking, stops writing. Communication becomes gestures and frustrated grunts. His humanity is being traded for functionality bit by bit. The child whose eyes multiplied. She's 9 years old, was 9 years old. Now she has 6 eyes, arranged in pairs across her face and temples. She can see things others can't. Movement in darkness, heat signatures, somehow the structural weaknesses in buildings before they collapse. She saved lives with her visions. She also screams at night, her multiple eyes seeing nightmares from multiple angles simultaneously. Her mother holds her, tries to comfort her, but how do you comfort a child who's seeing her humanity traded for utility? The former scribe who develops redundant organs, a second heart, additional lungs, backup kidneys. He's the healthiest person in the settlement. He doesn't cough blood. He processes toxins better. He needs less food and water. He's adapting to the environment, becoming suited for survival on this poisoned world. He's also terrified because he can feel the changes continuing. Feels new structures growing inside him, biological systems he doesn't have names for. He's becoming something better at survival than baseline human, which means he's becoming something other than human. The philosophical question haunts your settlement. At what point do you stop being human? Is it a physical threshold? Too many mutations and you're something else? Is it psychological? As long as you think and feel like a human, you are one. Is it legal? The Imperium's definition, which marked everyone here as non-human the moment they survived contamination. There are no good answers. Only survival, day by day, watching yourselves change and hoping that whatever you're becoming still retains enough of who you were. Javan makes his choice on day 183. It's not dramatic. There's no moment of temptation, no demonic manifestation, no obvious corruption. It's simpler and sadder than that. He's starving. The group is starving. Supplies have run critically low. The sergeant is preparing to send salvage teams into more dangerous areas, radiation zones, unstable structures, territories claimed by hostile survivor groups. People will die in the attempt. The Whispers offer an alternative. They show him a location, a sealed storage facility that somehow survived the bombardment intact. Food, water, medical supplies, enough to sustain the group for months. There's a catch. There's always a catch. The Whispers want something in return. Nothing big, just a small favor. Just open yourself a little more. Just listen more carefully. Just accept a little more of what they're offering. Javan stands at the threshold of the storage facility, exactly where the Whispers said it would be, exactly as described. He can see the supplies through the broken door, can see salvation for his group, his friends, the people who have become his family in this hell. All he has to do is say yes. Accept the Whispers. Stop resisting. Stop fighting. Just surrender to the voices that have kept him alive when the Emperor abandoned him. He thinks about the sergeant's warnings, about Imperial doctrine, about the difference between humanity and corruption, about what he's becoming and what he'll lose if he accepts. Then he thinks about the 9-year-old child with 6 eyes who screams at night, about Petra's transparent skin showing her broken heart, about the engineer who can no longer speak but fixes machines with his curse, about everyone suffering because of choices they didn't make, contamination they couldn't prevent, survival that became its own damnation. The Emperor had his chance to save them. He chose genocide instead. Javan opens the door, takes the supplies, and in the privacy of his own mind where no one else can hear, he stops resisting the Whispers. They sound pleased. They sound almost proud. And for the first time since the bombardment, Javan feels like someone actually cares whether he lives or dies. That night, he looks in the mirror again. His eyes are fully gold now, bright, luminous, inhuman. He can see things in the darkness that he couldn't before. Can sense the presence of others, their emotions, their intentions. He's becoming something more than human, or less. He's not sure there's a difference anymore. "I'm still me," he whispers to his reflection. But this time he doesn't believe it, and neither do the whispers. The vault, because that's what everyone calls it now, the proper name lost to necessity, is built in what used to be an industrial manufacturing complex deep beneath Hive Tertius's foundations. It's a maze of assembly floors, storage chambers, and access tunnels that somehow survived the bombardment relatively intact. The main assembly floor has been converted into a common area. The storage chambers are now living quarters. The tunnel network provides scavenging access to the ruins above while maintaining protection from the poisoned atmosphere. 307 people live here now. 307 survivors from a world of 14 billion. A statistical impossibility sustained by luck, location, and the desperate human will to continue existing even when existence has lost all meaning. The vault has structure, has rules, has government after a fashion. The sergeant leads the security force, 15 people with guard training or gang experience, armed with salvaged weapons and maintained through discipline. Their job is to protect the vault from external threats and enforce internal order. They're police and military combined, the thin line between civilization and collapse. Magistrate Yellen, a former administratum clerk who survived because he'd been in a sealed records vault during the bombardment, handles logistics, resource allocation, work assignments, record keeping. He maintains ledgers with obsessive precision, tracking every ration, every liter of water, every medical supply. The ledgers are meaningless in any real sense. There's no imperial oversight, no tithe to report, no bureaucracy to satisfy. But maintaining them gives him purpose and gives the vault a semblance of organization. Brother Methodius, who's not really a brother in the Mechanicus sense, just an apprentice tech priest who never received his final augmentations, keeps the machinery running. The water filtration systems, the air scrubbers, the power generators running on scavenged fuel. He prays to the Omnissiah over every repair, even though he suspects the Omnissiah stopped listening to this world when the Exterminatus was declared. And then there's Vec, gang leader from the old Underhive. Criminal, murderer, extortionist. He'd be the first to admit it. He survived because the Underhive is always prepared for apocalypse, and his gang had a fortified position and supplies. In the new reality, his skills at violence and resource acquisition make him valuable. He sits on the leadership council not because anyone likes him, but because his 20 gang members are a force that can't be ignored or excluded. 4 leaders, 4 different perspectives, 4 different ideas of how humanity should function when humanity has been erased from existence. Together, they've built something. Not civilization, calling it that would be aspirational to the point of delusion, but structure, rules, a system. You'd think that surviving Exterminatus would create solidarity, unity, a sense that everyone's in this together. You'd be wrong. Scarcity creates hierarchy. Hierarchy creates resentment. And resentment, given time and pressure, creates exactly the kind of social stratification that defined the Imperium itself. There are the workers, the majority assigned to salvage teams, water collection, food scavenging, maintenance duties. They work, receive rations, and survive. They're the base of the pyramid. There are the specialists, the former medici, the engineer, those with skills that make them more valuable than basic labor. They receive slightly larger rations, better living quarters, priority medical care. They're the middle tier. There are the leadership and security, the sergeants, enforcers, the council members, those who make decisions and maintain order. They receive the best rations, the safest quarters, the cleanest water. They're the top tier. And then there are the contaminated, those too mutated to work but not dangerous enough to execute. They're kept in the deep chambers, given minimal rations, avoided by the others. They're the untouchables, the reminder of what everyone fears becoming. It's the imperial system in miniature. The hierarchy that the vault's residents grew up in, served under, never questioned. And now, abandoned by that Imperium, they've recreated it perfectly. Because it's the only system they know. Because hierarchy and order feel safer than equality and chaos. Because even in damnation, humans need structure. The sergeant stands watch sometimes, looking at the vault she helped build, and you can see the recognition in her eyes. They've recreated the very system that abandoned them. And it works. It functions. It keeps 300 people alive in a place where survival should be impossible. She hates it, hates herself for implementing it. But she doesn't change it, because it works. The economy of the vault runs on days. A day is a unit of survival expectancy, the resources required to keep one person alive for one day. A standard ration pack equals 5 days. A functional water filter equals 30 days. A Medikey kit with antibiotics equals 60 days. People trade in days, barter in days, calculate their worth in days. A salvage team member who finds a cache of supplies earns days, credited to them in Magistrate Yellen's ledgers, redeemable for extra rations, better quarters, priority medical care. A specialist who repairs critical equipment earns days. Even the contaminated can earn days by volunteering for dangerous tasks, testing contaminated water sources, entering unstable structures. It's an economy of desperation, but it's surprisingly sophisticated. Markets emerge. Specialists trade their skills for days. Someone who's good at finding functional equipment can accumulate hundreds of days, a fortune, insurance against injury or illness. Someone who's unskilled or unlucky can fall into deficit, owing days for resources they've consumed but haven't earned. And when you owe too many days, when your debt exceeds any possibility of repayment, you have options, all of them bad. There's a young woman, can't be more than 20, who comes to Magistrate Yellen's office on day 284. Her name is Selene. Former hive worker, nothing special, just someone who survived through luck and location. Her father is dying. Infection from a wound sustained during salvage work. Without antibiotics, he'll be dead in days, real days, not currency. The vault has antibiotics, a single kit carefully hoarded, reserved for critical cases. How many days? She asks Magistrate Yellen. He consults his ledgers. 200 days for the full treatment. She stares at him. I don't have 200 days, I have 37. Then you can't afford it. He'll die. Many people die, Selene. We can't save everyone. Resources must be allocated based on value and ability to repay. He's my father. And I'm sorry, truly. But the antibiotics are community resources, and the community requires compensation. She stands there trembling with desperation and rage and grief. What can I do? What can I offer? Magistrate Yellen doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. She knows what he's thinking. What everyone thinks when someone asks that question. There are other currencies in the vault. Services, favors, things that don't get recorded in the official ledgers but everyone knows about. The black market of desperation. She leaves without the antibiotics. 3 days later, her father dies. The infection spreads to his blood, then his organs, then his brain. He dies screaming, delirious with fever, calling for help that never comes. 2 days after that, you see Selene in one of the deep tunnels providing services to one of Vex's gang members in exchange for a handful of ration packs. She sees you watching. Her expression isn't shame, she's past shame. It's just emptiness. The hollow stare of someone who's lost everything that made them human and is just going through the motions of survival because stopping requires more energy than continuing. The sergeant finds out, calls a council meeting. The discussion: should prostitution be prohibited, regulated, or ignored? Vec argues for regulation, taxation, health protocols, official brothels. People need release, stress relief. Why not formalize it? The vault gets a cut, everyone's safer. Brother Methodius argues for prohibition, moral degradation, exploitation, loss of human dignity. Magistrate Yellen argues for documentation. If it's happening, it should be tracked, taxed, regulated. The sergeant argues for nothing. She just sits there, listening to the others debate how to formalize the sexual exploitation of desperate people, and you can see the death of something in her eyes. Some last remnant of hope that they were better than this. They settle on regulation. official brothels in the deep tunnels, taxation at 20%, health checks by the medici orderly, protection provided by the sergeant's security force. Selene becomes one of the first registered sex workers. She earns days this way, enough to survive, enough to pay for food and water, enough to avoid falling into deficit. She never smiles, never speaks unless necessary, just goes through the motions of survival, day after day, trading pieces of herself for the privilege of continued existence. This isn't depravity. This isn't moral failure. This is survival economics in its purest, cruelest form. This is what happens when humans are reduced to pure biological need, when morality becomes unaffordable luxury, when civilization's veneer is stripped away by absolute necessity. The Imperium destroyed the world to prevent corruption. In the survivors, it's creating corruption of a different kind, not chaos taint, but the corruption of forced pragmatism, of morality sacrificed to necessity, of humans becoming the worst versions of themselves because the alternative is death. Month 8 brings the question no one wants to ask: do we repopulate? 300 people is not a sustainable population. Basic genetics requires diversity, hundreds or thousands of individuals to prevent inbreeding depression. 300 people, isolated indefinitely, will collapse into genetic catastrophe within a few generations, unless they don't breed at all, unless they accept that they're the last generation, the end of their species' presence on this world. The debate splits the vault into factions. The continuists argue that humanity must continue, even here. That children represent hope, future, the possibility that this won't last forever, that the Emperor wouldn't have allowed them to survive if there wasn't divine purpose. That repopulation is a moral duty, a way to honor the billions who died by ensuring humanity persists on this world. The finalists argue that bringing children into this hell is the ultimate cruelty. That children born on a poisoned world, condemned to death by imperial decree, living in toxic ruins without hope of rescue, is torture. That the merciful choice is to accept extinction, to let the last generation die peacefully rather than perpetuating suffering. And then there are the eugenicists. They argue that repopulation is necessary but must be controlled. Genetic screening mandatory, mutations disqualifying. Only the pure baseline humans permitted to breed. Children born with contamination must be addressed. It's imperial doctrine transplanted into the vault. The same genetic purity obsession that defined the Imperium's human baseline requirements, now enforced by survivors who have no Imperium to serve. The council debates for weeks. Arguments grow heated, emotional, theological. The sergeant remains mostly silent, recognizing that there are no good answers. Brother Methodius argues for screening. Contamination cannot be allowed to propagate. Magistrate Yellen argues for documentation. All pregnancies must be registered, tracked, monitored. Vec argues for freedom. People will breed regardless of policy. Better to acknowledge reality than try to control it. The council's debate lasts for weeks, stretching through the cold metal corridors of the vault like an infection that won't heal. 307 survivors, and they're arguing about whether to bring more life into a world that's already been declared legally dead by the Imperium itself. They settle on a compromise that satisfies no one, the kind of political middle ground that everyone accepts not because it's right, but because continuing the argument costs more energy than anyone has left to give. Reproduction is permitted, they decide, but it must be registered with Magistrate Yellen's obsessive record-keeping. Genetic screening is encouraged, strongly encouraged, with all the bureaucratic weight that phrase carries, but not mandatory, because forcing medical procedures on desperate people feels too much like the tyranny they're supposedly trying to avoid. But then comes the clause that changes everything, the phrase that transforms a policy document into a death warrant. Children born with significant mutations, the Council declares, may be subject to community decision regarding their future. Community decision. Two words that sound so reasonable, so democratic, so civilized. Two words that everyone in the vault understands are pure euphemism, a linguistic fig leaf covering something monstrous. Because what those words really mean, what everyone knows they mean, even if no one wants to say it out loud, is that the Leadership Council, maybe with input from the broader community if they're feeling particularly democratic that day, will decide if a mutant child is allowed to live. They've established death panels for babies. The sergeant stands at the back of the council chamber when the vote is cast, watching the hands rise in favor, watching people she's fought beside and bled with vote to create a system where infants can be condemned for the sin of being born wrong. She doesn't vote, doesn't raise her hand either way, just stands there with that 1,000-yard stare she's developed over 3 years of making impossible decisions, and you can see something dying behind her eyes. Some last remnant of hope that they were better than this, that survival wouldn't cost them everything that made them human. But hope is a luxury, and the vault has none to spare. Lena and Marcus register their pregnancy in month 9, 9 months since the Exterminatus, not 9 months of pregnancy, though the timing is grimly appropriate. They're both salvage team members, early 30s, with the kind of weathered faces that come from spending too much time breathing toxic air through inadequate filtration. They've been together since before the bombardment, one of those quiet partnerships that form in the underhive where trust is rarer than water and twice as valuable. Magistrate Yellen makes note in his ledgers with the careful precision he brings to everything. Name, age, profession. Expected due date, genetic screening status, declined. He looks up at that last entry, his pen hovering over the parchment, and you can see him calculating the implications. But he doesn't say anything, just makes the note and reminds them in his dry administratum voice that they're responsible for securing additional rations to support the child, that water allocation will not increase automatically, that the community's resources are finite and every mouth matters. The Medici orderly, Varos, the young man who's doing his best to provide healthcare with supplies that would make a medieval barber surgeon weep, provides what prenatal care he can, which is to say, almost none. He has no vitamins, no supplements, no imaging equipment, no way to monitor the fetus's development beyond pressing his hands against Lena's swelling belly and hoping he can feel something wrong before it kills her. He does his best. His best is woefully inadequate, but it's all anyone has. The vault watches the pregnancy with an attention that borders on obsessive, because this isn't just a child, this is a symbol. This is proof that life persists, that humanity endures, that survival means more than just grinding existence until death. People who haven't smiled in months find themselves grinning when they see Lena's growing stomach. Conversations that used to center on supply shortages and mutation rates suddenly include speculation about names, about what the child will look like, about whether they'll have Marcus's eyes or Lena's stubborn chin. For a brief, beautiful moment, the vault remembers how to hope. Lena carries through the pregnancy in relative secrecy, which is difficult in a community of 300 people living in close quarters where privacy is a theoretical concept and everyone knows everyone else's business. But she manages it, working on salvage teams as long as physically possible, earning those precious days in the vault's brutal resource economy, building up a reserve to ensure the child will have what it needs. She's bent over with exhaustion by the end, her body struggling to create new life in an environment designed to extinguish it. But she persists with the same stubborn determination that kept her alive through the bombardment. The birth happens in month 17, 17 months since Exterminatus, in one of the deep chambers that's been converted into a makeshift medical facility. The conversion consists mainly of hanging salvaged sheets to create the illusion of sterility and boiling water, to sterilize the few instruments Varos has managed to scavenge. Lena screams through the labor because they have no anesthetics, no painkillers, nothing to ease the ancient agony of bringing life into the world. Marcus holds her hand and whispers encouragement that sounds increasingly desperate as the hours stretch on. When the child finally comes, slick with blood and amniotic fluid, taking its first gasping breath of recycled, toxic-tinged air. There's a moment of perfect silence. That sacred pause when everyone is waiting to see if the child will cry, if the lungs will work, if this fragile new life will take hold or slip away before it even begins. And then the baby screams. Loud, angry, absolutely furious at being dragged into existence. And the sound, which would have been annoying in the old world, which would have triggered noise complaints and tired groans, becomes the most beautiful thing anyone in the vault has heard in years. The sound of life, the sound of persistence, the sound of humanity saying no to extinction. The child is perfect. Varros counts the fingers 10, counts the toes 10, checks the lungs healthy judging by the volume of those screams, examines the eyes clear, normal, no obvious abnormalities. A boy, completely, beautifully, miraculously normal. They name him Davos after Marcus's father who died in the bombardment. Marcus's father, who'd been a manufactorum worker, who'd never done anything remarkable in his life, who died when the ceiling collapsed and crushed him along with 10,000 others. Now his name lives on, carried by a child born in hell but perfect despite it. For 3 weeks, Davos is the vault's living symbol of hope. People who haven't smiled in months smile at him. Hardened salvage workers who strip corpses without flinching become gentle and careful when they're near the baby, as if proximity to innocence might restore something they've lost. The sound of Davos crying echoes through the metal corridors, and instead of being irritating, it's precious. A reminder that life persists, that the future is possible, that survival means more than just waiting to die. Even the sergeant, who's seen too much to believe in symbols, finds herself stopping by Lena and Marcus's quarters more often than necessary. She doesn't say much, just looks at the child with an expression that might be wonder or might be grief. Grief for the world he'll never know, the childhood he'll never have, the life that's been stolen from him before he could even understand what was taken. For 3 weeks, Davos represents everything good about humanity. Resilience, hope, the stubborn refusal to surrender to entropy. And then in week 4, the signs start. It begins with discoloration. Small patches at first, scattered across Davos's torso and arms like birthmarks. Except birthmarks don't move, and these do slowly, almost imperceptibly, the patterns shifting over the course of days. Not growing exactly, just migrating, rearranging themselves like living things under the skin. Lena notices first during a changing. She stares at her son's chest, trying to remember if that dark patch was on the left side yesterday or the right. Trying to convince herself it's the lighting, the stress, her exhausted mind playing tricks. But the patches are moving, she's sure of it, and they're spreading. Then the eyes change, not just the color, though that would be disturbing enough. Davos's eyes were gray at birth, like most infants. But over the course of week 4, they darken to a deep amber, then develop structures. Additional irises, concentric rings that pulse slowly like ripples on water. Patterns that absolutely do not belong in human biology, that look almost geometric in their precision, that seem to shift and reconfigure when you're not looking directly at them. The reflexes come next, and they're the most disturbing because they're functional. When Davos grabs something, a finger, a piece of cloth, the edge of his blanket, his grip strength is extraordinary. Not just strong for an infant, but strong, period. Marcus tries to pry his son's fingers off his thumb one day and can't do it without genuinely struggling, without applying more force than should ever be necessary with a month-old baby. And the crying. The Emperor preserved them, the crying. It still sounds like a baby crying on the surface, but there are harmonics underneath, frequencies that feel almost intentional, like language that's not quite language. Like communication happening at a level human ears weren't designed to process. Sometimes when Davos cries, you feel it in your teeth. Feel it in your bones. Feel it in the primitive lizard part of your brain that recognizes predator calls and knows to hide. Varros examines the child with hands that shake slightly, medical training warring with superstitious dread. He takes tissue samples, carefully, trying not to hurt the baby. though Davos doesn't even seem to notice the needle prick. He examines the eyes with a salvaged medical scope, looking for explanations, for rational causes, for anything that isn't the answer everyone is thinking but no one wants to say. Finally, he delivers his diagnosis in the privacy of Lena and Marcus's quarters, keeping his voice low even though everyone in the vault will know within hours anyway. Genetic mutation, almost certainly warp-influenced, given the patterns and the symmetry. The child is developing into something other than baseline human, not immediately dangerous, not obviously corrupted, just. He trails off, unable to finish the sentence. Just wrong, just contaminated, just exactly what the Imperium was trying to eliminate when they burned this world to ash. Lena holds Davos closer, protective instinct overriding everything else. He's still my son. I know, Varros says, and his voice is genuinely sympathetic. But the Council's rules. Fuck the Council's rules. Marcus says it quietly without heat, just stating a fact. He's not hurting anyone, he's just a baby, our baby. I know, Varros repeats, but you need to understand what you're facing. The eugenicist faction will never accept this. They'll argue that allowing a mutant to grow up in the vault is existential risk, that contamination spreads, that we can't compromise on genetic purity, and they'll have the votes. So what do we do? Varros looks at the child, at Davos, who's staring back with those wrong eyes, those concentric ringed amber eyes that seem too intelligent for an infant, that seem to see more than they should. I don't know, he admits. But whatever you decide, decide quickly, before someone else notices and takes the choice away from you. Lena and Marcus make a choice that night. They don't report the changes. They keep Davos hidden in their quarters as much as possible, limiting visitors, claiming he's colicky and fussy to explain the isolation and the strange sounds. They wrap him in blankets to hide the moving skin patterns. They avoid bright light that would make his eyes' wrongness too obvious. But you can't hide a baby in a community of 300 people living in underground tunnels where sound carries and walls are thin, and everyone is hypervigilant for threats. You can't hide a baby's cries, especially when those cries have harmonics that make people's skin crawl. You can't hide from a community where everyone knows everyone's business, where gossip is entertainment and secrets are currency. The whispers start within days. Have you seen the child? Have you heard it cry? Something's wrong with it. Something's changed. The parents are hiding something. The whispers reach the sergeant on day 147 of Davos's life. She listens to the reports, third-hand accounts, rumors, speculation mixed with genuine concern, and she feels that familiar weight settling on her shoulders. The weight of command, the weight of decision. The weight of being the person who has to act when everyone else can pretend ignorance. She comes to their quarters with 2 security personnel. Not threateningly, the weapons are holstered, the postures are professional rather than aggressive. But the message is clear. This isn't a request, and resistance is futile. Lena is holding Davos when they arrive, and the protective way she clutches him to her chest makes the sergeant's job infinitely harder. Because Lena isn't a criminal or a threat. She's a mother protecting her child, which is the most fundamentally human impulse in existence. And the sergeant is about to punish her for it. We need to see him, the sergeant says. No preamble, no softening, just the mission. He's fine, he's healthy. Lena's voice is steady, but her hands are shaking. Lena, let me see him. No. The sergeant doesn't draw her weapon, doesn't threat, doesn't raise her voice. Just stands there with that patient, exhausted expression of someone who's had to make too many terrible decisions, someone who's already calculated all the possible outcomes and knows that none of them are good. Lena, Marcus, you know the rules. You knew them when you conceived. You knew them when you declined genetic screening. Children with significant mutations are subject to community decision. We need to see him. He's not hurting anyone. Marcus steps between his partner and the sergeant as if his body could somehow shield his family from what's coming. He's just a baby, our baby. He hasn't done anything wrong. I know, The sergeant's voice carries genuine sympathy, which somehow makes it worse. Cruelty would be easier to resist. But the rules aren't about what he's done. They're about what he might become, what he represents. You understand that, don't you? So we're supposed to just hand him over. Let the council decide if our son deserves to live. Let me see him or my people will take him. Your choice. Except it's not a choice. It never was. Choice is an illusion in the vault, in this situation, in this damned existence where every option leads to suffering, and the only variable is how much and for whom. Lena slowly unwraps the blanket, revealing Davos' small form. The moving skin patterns are immediately visible in the harsh lumen light, darker patches migrating across his torso like living things. The child stares up at the sergeant with those wrong eyes, those amber concentric ringed eyes that track her movement with disturbing precision. The sergeant has seen enough mutation in 3 years to recognize contamination, enough corruption to know exactly what the Imperium would have done if they'd discovered this child. She stares at Davos for a long moment, and you can see the calculation happening behind her own eyes. The political implications, the precedent, the necessity of maintaining the rules even when the rules are monstrous. Council meeting, she says quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, we'll make the decision together, as a community. Please, Lena starts, but the sergeant is already turning away, already walking toward the door with her security personnel, already carrying the weight of what comes next. Lock your door tonight, she says without looking back. Get some rest. Whatever happens tomorrow, you'll need your strength. It's the closest thing to mercy she can offer. A warning, advanced knowledge of the execution date, a chance to prepare, to say goodbye, to make whatever impossible choice they're going to make. That night, Lena and Marcus hold each other and their son, and they consider their options with the desperate clarity that comes when every path leads to darkness. They could go to the council meeting, plead their case, argue that Davos is harmless, that mutation doesn't equal corruption, that their son deserves life, but the likely outcome is already determined. The eugenicist faction will never permit visible contamination to grow up in the vault. They'll argue species survival, genetic purity, the necessity of hard choices. They'll have the votes. They'll have logic on their side, at least the kind of logic that the Imperium has spent 10,000 years refining into doctrine. And Davos will be taken, and they'll never see him again except perhaps as a small corpse being consigned to the same fires that consume all the vault's unwanted waste. They could flee to the surface, try to survive outside the vault's protection, in the toxic ruins and ash-covered wastelands where the air itself is poison and the water is contaminated and hostile survivor groups hunt anything that moves. The outcome, death, maybe fast if they're lucky, probably slow if they're not. And Davos would die with them, would experience his brief life as nothing but suffering, would never have a chance at anything resembling childhood or safety or love. They could hide deeper in the tunnels, beyond the vault's explored territory, into the deep darkness where the old underhive systems extend for kilometers in every direction, where the maps are unreliable and the structures are unstable and the very air is questionable. Possible outcome, survival at least for a while, but it would mean permanent separation from community, from resources, from any hope of civilized existence. It would mean raising Davos in the darkness like some fairy tale monster, teaching him to hide from other humans, watching him grow up without understanding what he is or why everyone fears him. There are no good options. There never were. The trap was already sprung the moment Davos was conceived, the moment that egg and sperm united in Lena's toxic-saturated body and began building something that the Imperium would categorize as non-human. They choose the tunnels, because at least in the darkness, Davos will live. At least in the deep places where the vault doesn't go, he might have a chance to grow up to be something, to exist in a universe that declared his existence illegal. They pack what little they have: water bottles, ration packs, salvaged clothing, a hand lumen with dying batteries. Marcus disassembles his bunk and fashions a crude carrier for Davos, something Lena can wear on her back to keep her hands free for climbing. They wait until the deep cycle hours when most of the vault sleeps, when the corridors are dim and the security rotation is thinnest, and they disappear into the tunnels, following maintenance passages that haven't been used in years, descending into depths that even the sergeant's careful maps don't document, taking their son into the darkness because darkness is the only place left that might allow him to exist. The sergeant finds their empty quarters in the morning, looks at the open-air vent, the disturbed dust, the obvious signs of hasty departure. She stands in the doorway for a long moment, calculating. She could send security teams after them, could track them through the tunnels, hunt them down, bring them back for judgment, could enforce the council's decision before the council even meets. But she doesn't. She just stands there, staring at the empty room, thinking about all the impossible decisions she's made in 3 years of survival, thinking about the line between necessity and cruelty and whether that line even exists anymore. She closes the door, seals the quarters, marks them in her records as vacated. When the council meets that afternoon and discovers the family has fled, there's outrage from the eugenicist faction, talk of pursuit, of enforcement, of precedent and order. The sergeant listens to the arguments, weighs the political implications, considers the resources required to hunt 2 people and a baby through kilometers of unstable tunnels. "No," she says finally, "we let them go." But the precedent. The precedent is that people who can't live under our rules leave. They've left. They're no longer the vault's problem. She looks around the council chamber, meeting eyes, daring anyone to challenge her. We have limited resources, limited personnel, limited time. Spending either on a manhunt through dangerous tunnels for 2 people who don't want to be here is stupidity. They're gone. Let them stay gone. The council reluctantly agrees because the sergeant's logic is sound, and because no one really wants to be the person who orders the hunting down of a family. They settle instead for stricter protocols going forward. Genetic testing before conception becomes mandatory, not encouraged. Screening of pregnancies becomes required, not optional. Any child born with mutations must be surrendered to community custody immediately. No exceptions, no appeals. They're tightening the noose, enforcing the Imperium's genetic purity doctrine with the same ruthless efficiency that condemned their world. They're becoming the very thing that killed them, and they're doing it because they believe it's necessary, because someone has to make the terrible decisions, because the alternative, chaos, disorder, uncontrolled mutation, seems worse. The question haunts the vault in the days that follow. Have we maintained humanity, or have we become its worst aspects? Sometimes, in the deep cycle hours when the vault is quiet, you hear sounds from the distant tunnels. Crying that might be Davos, or might be structural settling, or might be your imagination torturing you with implications. You don't know if Lena and Marcus are still alive down there in the darkness. Don't know if they found water, found food, found some way to survive in the places the vault doesn't go. You don't know if Davos is growing up or growing into something else. Don't know if the mutations are progressing, if the child is developing into something beautiful or something monstrous or something that transcends those categories entirely. You just know that the vault created them, created the necessity that drove them into darkness, created the system that declared a baby too wrong to deserve light, too contaminated to be allowed among the survivors who are themselves contaminated by the very act of survival. The Imperium's obsession with human purity, transplanted into this community of survivors, and enforced with the same cold logic that burned their world. The same reasoning that says individual suffering is acceptable if it serves species survival. The same calculus that justifies any atrocity as long as the numbers work out. There's no good answer to the question of whether the vault maintained humanity. Just survival, and the accumulating weight of compromises that feel like dying by degrees. Just the slow transformation from survivors into something else, not mutants in the physical sense, but mutants in the moral sense. People who have had their humanity eroded away by necessity until what's left resembles the Imperium they thought they served. Brutal, logical, absolutely certain of its own righteousness, and utterly incapable of mercy. You sometimes wonder in your private moments whether Lena and Marcus made the right choice. Whether raising a child in darkness and isolation is better than the alternatives. Whether love is enough to justify bringing life into suffering, or whether the merciful choice would have been to let Davos go, to accept the Council's judgment, to acknowledge that some lives cannot be lived. But then you remember, the Imperium already made that judgment. Already decided that everyone on this world was too contaminated to live. Already declared that survival itself was crime enough to warrant extinction. And you realize that Lena and Marcus did the only human thing possible in an inhuman situation. They chose love over logic, mercy over efficiency, hope over pragmatism. They chose their son. And whether that was right or wrong, whether Davos grows into something wonderful or something terrible, whether they survive another day or die in the darkness, that choice, that fundamental human choice to protect your child even when protection is futile, might be the only thing separating the Vault's survivors from the monsters they're so afraid of becoming. The Emperor isn't watching. The Imperium has moved on. The galaxy doesn't care. But somewhere in the deep tunnels beneath a dead world, a family exists in defiance of every rule, every doctrine, every logical conclusion that says they should have surrendered. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all humanity ever was. The stubborn, irrational, absolutely illogical refusal to surrender even when surrender is the only reasonable option. Maybe that's what survival really means. Not the Vault's structured civilization with its death panels and genetic screening. Not the Imperium's brutal efficiency with its Exterminatus protocols and its absolute certainty. But a mother and father and child, hiding in the darkness, choosing love over logic, choosing existence over extinction, choosing to continue despite every rational argument for stopping. The Vault may have maintained order, may have maintained structure, may have maintained survival, but in the tunnels, in the darkness, in the places the Vault doesn't go, that's where humanity persists. That's where it always has.